Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. Just going to take a second here and make sure that we're broadcasting okay. I don't see anything. Right, there goes something. Okay, good, we're on. Okay, what we've been doing is going through the prophecies, and I'm just going to go back and show you a few things. But 2 weeks ago, we started looking at Daniel chapter 11, just trying to pull all the prophecies in. So in Daniel, you've got chapter 2, which is the metal image. And let me just go back here and we will look at some of these things. So in Daniel 2, we have the metal image of everything. There we go. The gold head is the Babylonian Empire. The Persian Empire is the chest and arms of silver. Grecian Empire is copper or bronze. And then the legs of iron is Rome, which we want to really get into. But right now we're looking at these, and we looked at Daniel chapter 8 to see how the whole thing splits. And we did this a couple of weeks back. And when we're looking at this with the split of Greece, we have in chapter 8, the ram and the goat vision. And so there's this goat from Greece with one horn, which represents Alexander the Great, comes and conquers Persia, the ram, and the main horn, the one large horn, is broken off, and in its place sprout four horns. And this represents the four divisions of the empire: Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt, all run by Greeks. So it's the Greek Seleucid kingdom in Syria, and the Ptolemaic Egyptian kingdom, it's Greek kingdom in Egypt. So all this is interesting. We need to understand split into four, but Turkey and Greece have nothing to do with Israel. So Israel is trapped between Syria and Egypt, and they are constantly passed back and forth. The nation of Israel in Jerusalem at one time belongs to Syria, then it belongs to Egypt, then it belongs to Syria. They're right there at the border in the middle between the two. And this whole series is to tell us that the Antichrist comes out of the king of the north, or that comes out of the area of the Syrian Empire, the Seleucid Empire. And there's a lot of extra things dealing with the calendar and things like that we'll get into in March. And we'll go back to the calendar section. But this is what's being told with us in chapter 8. Now, Daniel also has some symbols of the empires in beast form. So you've got Assyria, Babylon being the winged lion, Medo-Persia being a bear, and Greece, or for all practical purpose, the northern Seleucid Empire and the southern Ptolemaic Empire, so Syria and Egypt. And it's fragments into four heads, and it's four wings also, two of which we don't have anything to do with, so the other two we're looking at. Rome starts off as one empire, then splits into two, the two legs. And there's other prophecies connected with Rome. So we're looking at that and understanding these things. And then we started looking at Daniel chapter 11, where the angel basically comes in and says, here's what it all means. I'm just going to tell it to you, not in symbolic form, but just straight out tell you what's going on. And so we started looking at this, and it starts off with the time of Persia. So in the Persian Empire, we just have verses 1 to 3. And we covered this before. This is the section of Daniel chapter 11, the very first part. And it basically says there's going to be four more kings of Persia, then the Greeks come. And we identified them. It was Cambyses, Pseudosmyrnus, Xerxes, or Darius, and Xerxes the first. And then at his time, we had the problem. And then after a time during that last king's reign, Alexander the Great rises up and conquers Persia as prophesied. So that's Daniel 11, 1 and 2. The fact that there are four Persian kings, then it will fall. So we've been told in no detail, complete detail with this, no uncertain terms, that there's 3 generations from Nebuchadnezzar to the fall of Babylon. Then there's 4 kings in succession from the time the Persians take over to the fall of the Persian Empire to Alexander the Great. His kingdom is broken up. And then there's so many kings from that to the coming of the Romans, and that's what we want to look at. So this is 1 and 2 because it's all in the time of the Persian kingdom. So when we get to Greece, it starts in verse 3, and we'll just touch on this and hop up because we got up to I think around verse 20. And then we stopped last week because I found those interesting parallels in Nimrod's kingdom and told you a little bit about the history, how it actually fragmented into 70 cultures or 70 languages that were quickly pulled back together, but it was never the same, and it was actually 4 empires. And out of those 4 empires, 2 of which tried to cause a problem with Abraham and his family. So the same kind of situation. In this case, the Greeks, 2 of which they don't care anything about anything, so leave Israel alone. The other 2 cause a problem with Israel. So the patterns are really interesting. So this is verses 3 and 4. We've covered this, but that's Alexander the Greek raising up. And that was 326 to 323 BC. And then he dies. It splits into the 4. And so we start talking about the kings of Egypt and the kings of Syria. And the first one mentioned is Ptolemy the First, Soter, who ruled from 323, which would be Alexander's death, to 285. And it mentions stuff that happened to him. And you can go back and look at the previous section on Daniel 11. And so we went through this. So the thing I want to draw your attention to is we get to chapter 11. It gets very specific, very literal, no symbols. And it's the first 4 kings of Persia, the coming of Alexander the Great, and then the split. And then verses 3 to around verse 30 is all the different Greek kingdoms and the things that happened back then. And then there's a section on the Maccabees, a couple of verses, and then Rome comes. And then there's this gap because it talks about Rome coming, burning the temple, which is 70 AD, and Israel ceases to exist. Then Israel comes back, and we pick right back up where we left off. There's a king of the north and a king of the south. So when you plug all this together, the king of the north is the Antichrist attacking Egypt during the time of the 7-year tribulation period. And there has been multiple kings of the north and kings of the south. They've always been Syria and Egypt because of that particular time. Backing up to chapter 8, we're told that the little horn who represents the Antichrist comes out of the northern horn, one of the horns, but it's actually Syria. So he's the king of the north. So all this stuff kind of gives us clues onto where the Antichrist comes from. And also which one of the nations, one of the 3 anyway, that rebel against the Antichrist, and that would be Egypt. So we need to look very carefully at Egypt. One other thing, we'll come right back to here, but one other thing was with the empires of Daniel, we said the Roman Empire starts as one empire, like with the hips, and then it breaks into 2 legs, which would be the eastern and western divisions of the Roman Empire. So Rome and eventually the Holy Roman Empire in the west, and in the east it's Byzantium and maybe other things. But the thing is, when we get down to the time of the feet and toes of clay, the prophecy in chapter 2 says that the rock comes that was made without hands, the stone rather, and hits it and destroys everything and sets up a kingdom. So the Messianic kingdom comes during the time of these 10 kings. So we're trying to figure out who they are, where they're at, when they're at, those kind of things. And so what happens here at this point, notice if this is the Western or European version, and this is the Middle Eastern or Byzantine, Rome and Byzantium, then you've got 5 toes out of one leg and 5 toes out of another. Now, we're not told that directly. This is an assumption on my part anyway, but unless the statue is funny looking, where the guy's got 6 or 7 toes on one foot and 3 on the other, something like that, which it doesn't. It'd have to mention that. If it's a normal statue, it's human looking, it's going to be 5 toes and 5 toes. So we can assume, most likely, not necessarily guaranteed, but to a safe bet, 5 of these kingdoms come out of what used to be the Roman Empire, Western, and the other from what used to be Byzantium. But then there is another thing that kind of comes in here later, and we'll get to that when we study Rome. But I wanted to break that up to you just so that we understand. So back to the Greek, we've got in this version, it's just the Greek Empire, but we've seen it break into four. And now we're talking specifically about all the kings and the wars of those two of the four. So going back here, again, we're right here. Alexander the Great, and then we've got Ptolemy the First. And basically, to summarize what we looked at last time, Antiochus wants to take over Egypt, but Egypt has just made an alliance or kind of a pseudo alliance with Rome. If he attacks Egypt, it might be a problem. So he gets the bright idea. The next king of Egypt is actually a 7-year-old kid. So if he gives his daughter in marriage to the 7-year-old kid, she can manipulate him. That brilliant idea. And so she'll tell him, you better do this for the kingdom, and this is how you do it. And that way he can not have to take over and get Rome or anybody mad at him, but under the table control the other nation. And of course, it doesn't work like that. I know that's what Cleopatra does. I need to back up. But anyway, Bernice marries Antiochus. Different story. We haven't got there yet. But Bernice marries him. The first wife gets mad, decides she wants her kid on the throne, so she poisons Bernice, poisons the children. Then there's going to be an investigation, so she actually poisons the king, her husband, and puts her son on the throne. But then Bernice's brother and other things come and attack them and take them over. So lots of interesting stories. And this is all in history, but it's also here in Daniel. Okay, and then we get into verses 7 and 9. We get Ptolemy the third, Seleucus the third, Ptolemy the fourth, and then Ptolemy Epiphanes in verses 13 to 15. And then Antiochus taking control of Israel, the glorious land. There was a major battle in 197. And that's when Antiochus gives Cleopatra to Ptolemy V. And that's what I was telling you about. The Cleopatra marries this. And you can understand why she might have an affair with Mark Antony. She's married to a 7-year-old kid, and she's not going to wait 10, 15, 20 years. But she does what's right instead of following what her father's telling her to do. She does what's right for the Egyptian people. Okay, so, and then we get a war that happens. And that's where we left off last night in verses 18 and 19. So we'll try to pick up from here and go forward. So there's an attack of Rome. Roman ships are beginning to come, and they come in waves. So this is 190 BC, about 100 and some years before Rome actually takes over the area of Israel. But Antiochus attacked the coastlands with 300 ships. But Roman consul Lucius Cornelius Scipio defeated him in the Battle of Magnesia in Asia Minor in 190 BC. So you can go back and look this up. You can grab this guy's name, Lucius. Here you go, this guy, or the Battle of Magnesia in 190, or a battle of Rome to the Seleucid Empire. So there's lots of ways to look this up. And again, this information is basically just from, it's in several study Bibles. So if you've got a good study Bible, doesn't matter if it's King James or whatever, but the notes will tell you what all happened. So Antiochus then does this, but he dies in 187. So the battle is in 190. 3 years later, he dies trying to plunder another temple. So then we've got Seleucus the Fourth, which ruled from 187, and this would be in the northern kingdom in Syria, 187 to 175 BC. Seleucus the Fourth was the son of Antiochus the Great, gave orders to his finance minister to have Jerusalem temple, which is the glory of the kingdom, plundered. And it's interesting how when, the Lord can change things at any time 100 different ways. And in this case, the king says, you take care of it. I just want the money, go plunder the temple. Well, it doesn't happen. So his well, the verse here in verse 20 says, "Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle." He's actually poisoned. So Heliodorus, his finance minister, formed a conspiracy for whatever reason. Instead of going and plundering the temple of Jerusalem, within a few days he was poisoned. So then the new king takes over. So it's interesting to me how it talks about certain kings giving their daughters to marriage, and that helps or doesn't help the kingdom. There's certain battles in certain areas. Lots of people get killed. Very few people get killed. It calls into play other people from Kittim or other places. And it's just really interesting how the specifics are there. So Antiochus IV Epiphanes, this is the one we get to that we talk a lot of, and we really need to go back and look careful at Antiochus's life because he is a really good picture of the Antichrist. So this is the notes that I've got for him. So this is verses 21 to 27 of here. So Antiochus Epiphanes was most vile. He continually persecuted the Jews until the revolt of the Maccabees. And you remember the stories from 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which are in the Apocrypha. So it'd be in a King James 1611, in a lot of other places too. And you can get them online. But the story is that he said, we're going to be Greeks from now on. We're going to, or the Jews are. There's no Torah, there's no circumcision, there's no Jewish stuff. If you sacrifice, it's to a Greek god, you dress in Greek clothing, you use Greek money, Greek calendar, you start speaking Greek, everything's Greek. We're going to be the same. We all are the same, strife will cease. You know, this idea. So he's going to force it. And remember all the tortures and the things that happened to the people that refused. And so the story is, summary is that Antiochus ordered everyone to sacrifice a pig to Zeus or to, some pagan group, pagan god. And Judah Maccabee, is like a lot of us. It's like, I don't care about politics. Whatever's going on is their business. It's not mine. I have crops to do and all this other stuff. So he comes into town and he's basically seized. And, we need to put you on the record that you're sacrificing to Zeus. Just out of the blue. It's like, well, as long as you guys are stupid up in, Washington or the capital, up there in Greece or wherever, I don't care. But you don't come here and try to force me to do something. So he's a patriot. So he's ordered to take a spear and sacrifice or stab a pig. He doesn't have to do it perfectly. He just has to do a piece of it to appease, the governor. Well, he takes the spear and he pierces one of the guards. He ends up killing all of them because they were unexpecting that. And there's the revolt, and the Maccabees rise up, and that thing happens. You remember the story of they bring in troops with elephants so they could trample everybody. Well, the Maccabees have lions. Lions attack the elephants and take the elephants down. So lots of interesting stories like that. Normally what's going to happen at that point is troops will be moved from other parts of the area that you control, and you'll have a ton of troops descend on that one province, and they won't stop until everybody's dead. So that's what happens when a rebellion is crushed, But what happens at this time is Antiochus dies. And it's interesting because then we have the story of the Maccabees rising up, declaring victory and ruling for 100 years until Rome comes and everything's fine. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls come in and say it's basically a slightly different story than that. And what they say is the Maccabees were godly. They put everything back, except the new guy. When Antiochus dies, the new person actually comes up and says, look, I don't care about religion or taxes, or not taxes, but I mean like any of the trappings that you guys sacrifice to whoever you want to, however you want to do it, whatever. The only thing I care about is money. So I want a tribute from you So you grain and stuff like that, or change it into gold currency. I want it in my currency, and I want you to follow my calendar system so you can give the money at the proper time. The only thing I ask is that you follow our calendar and that you use our money, at least in dealing with us. And the Maccabees decided that's a win-win situation. Well, not exactly. The Zadok priest said, number one, we can't switch calendars. It's forbidden. And number two, we're not supposed to do, the money change thing. So this is when they say everyone started following the lunar calendar system. And if you go back and you look this up, it's really interesting because the biblical calendar system starts with Nisan, and Passover is the 14th of Nisan, everything just like it is in the Bible. But the current Jewish system is a lunar system, and they will start the month of Nisan at the new moon closest to the spring equinox. Reality, the month of Nisan is supposed to start the first Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. And it's a lunar-based calendar, solar-based, no moon calculations in it at all. To us, it's like, why do we care? We don't celebrate Passover. We don't sacrifice pigs. We don't go to a temple. We're not Jewish, but it's part of the history. And again, it's something similar to what the Antichrist will do. He'll come in through intrigue, be confusing people through flattery, change the times and the seasons, the scripture says, and the other things, and set up the abomination of desolation. So it's an interesting thing how all this kind of comes together. And there's a lot of other information in the scrolls about that. But let's look at Antiochus Epiphanes specifically. So Antiochus Epiphanes, it says, was vile, persecuted it, and all that stuff is in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And Daniel 21 through 27 says this: in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of a kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And this supposedly, according to the historians, is what Antiochus did. He wasn't of royal blood. He should not have been the next king. But somehow he convinces Rome that he should be the next king, and just says, manipulates, and then waits for Rome to say, you're in, he's out. And then now you've got Rome's backing. So he didn't come in, he didn't attack, he didn't do anything like that. He just manipulated. In our time period, you can compare this to Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler actually ran for public office and was duly elected in a election process. And then he immediately disbanded the election process and the other groups, and turned it into a dictatorship. But Adolf Hitler, in other words, didn't come up and say, let's kill the current Kaiser, of Germany and just take over. He actually came in through flatteries or manipulation. So however he did it exactly, Antiochus Epiphanes did the same thing, not with an army, just through manipulation, politics. So he comes in through flatteries. And with the arms of a flood, he shall be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. And also the prince of the covenant. The prince of the covenant would be someone like the high priest in Jerusalem. After a league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, and shall come up and shall be strong with a small group of people. He shall enter peaceably even to the fattest places of the providence, so that he will do which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He's able to accomplish all these takeovers that his father and grandfather and great-grandfather, the Seleucid Empire kings, could never pull off because Rome wouldn't allow it. Well, he now manipulates Rome. Let's see, and it says that he shall scatter among them the prey, the spoil, and the riches. Yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, the mighty fortified cities, even for a time. Now, time literally would be like a whole year, in other words. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south, that would be Egypt, with a great army. The king of the south will be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. He won't be able to win the war, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed the portion of his meat shall destroy him, whoever, the person that feeds him. His army will overflow, many shall fall down slain. And both of these kings' hearts will do mischief. They will speak lies at one another at one table, but shall not prosper. So they hang out together, they make covenants together, do nothing but lie to each other, and it doesn't work. Yet it shall be for the time appointed. So this is an interesting phrase, the time appointed. It either means that all of this stuff is appointed for a specific time, and it will happen as Daniel's telling us, or it means there's something in this whole situation that'll be repeated or a similar type that will happen with the Antichrist. And it probably means both, the time appointed. So this is what the scripture says. So here's the basic gist of the whole thing. Antiochus Epiphanes obtained the honor of the kingdom from his brother Demetrius I, and had Onias III, who was the prince of the covenant at the time, he was the Zadok priest, had him assassinated. And we see this in the books, again, of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Onias III. And the reference here is 2nd Maccabees 4, verses 4 through 10 is all about the assassination. So, yeah, okay, and we quote it down here. See that for full details. Antiochus Epiphanes deceived Rome into officially recognizing him. He then invaded Israel and most of Egypt. Ptolemy IV mobilized an army against him to stop him, but his younger brother, Ptolemy the seventh, entered into a conspiracy with Antiochus. So in other words, the younger brother was told by Antiochus, if you help me defeat your older brother, I will make sure that you're on the throne. I just don't like these 2 or 3 things your brother does. So if you help me defeat him and you promise you won't do these 1 or 2 things, I'll gladly put you on the throne and you take over and do whatever you want. And that sounds great. Younger brother sides with, he wants to be king. In reality, Antiochus had no design on doing that at all. You promise someone something, you lie to them, you manipulate them. If they, betray you, you kill them or have them killed if you can. If they succeed, great. Then you kill them anyway and you take what you want. So all intrigue and manipulation, lie after lie. So this is what happens. So as a result, Ptolemy VI was overthrown. So younger brother said, I'll take that deal and we'll do this. So here's what 2nd Maccabees says. This is from King James 1611. Onias, seeing the danger of this contention and that Apollonius is being governor of Celesyria, Phoenice, did rage and increase Simon's malice. He went to the king, not to be an accuser of his countrymen, but seeking the good of all, both public and private. Yeah, I know that's spelled weird, but this is King James 1611. So this time, not my spelling. Okay, so for this time, it was impossible that the state could continue to be quiet. Simon left to his folly. The king did not look thereunto. But after the death of Seleucus, when Antiochus, called Epiphanes, took the kingdom, Jason, the brother of Onias, labored underhand to be high priest, promising to the king by intercession 360 talents of silver, and of another revenue 80 talents. So he arranged payments like this. Besides this, he promised to assign 150 more, if he might have license to set him up a place for exercise and the training of both the fashions of the heathen. So in other words, they were supposed to create gymnasiums and bring in the Greek way of life, this kind of thing. And to write them of Jerusalem to be the name of the Antiochans, so under that providence. voluntarily submit to the king of the north, which when the king had granted, he had begotten into his hand the rule, which he forthwith brought forth his own nation in Greekish fashion. So this is the start of the Hellenists. You're going to turn everything into a Greek type culture. One thing I want to mention to you here is that, so Ananias the first, or Ananias here, is high priest. He's doing what he's supposed to, proper Zadok priest. His brother, they call him Jason. And it's interesting because Jason, that's a Greek name. Again, you're supposed to chuck all the Hebrew stuff and become Greek. So he takes the name of Jason. There's no Hebrew born by the name of Jason. That's a Greek name. That's not done. And when you look at this, he takes the name of Jason to be Greek to show that he's willing to follow what the king said. His actual name is Yeshua. And I find that really interesting. In this whole thing, we have another Yeshua, a fake Messiah, promising you peace if you just accept the worldly lifestyle and don't rock the boat. Just do what the government says and follow directions. And Onias the first said, no, we're going to follow God. And of course, he is threatened, run out, and or executed. So it's the same story over and over again. We're going to serve God, and that's just all there is to it. We might get assassinated. We might be persecuted for it. Or we're going to change our names to Jason and adopt the Greek pagan ways. And we're going to do what the government says, kind of stuff. So again, eventually, somewhere along the lines, when the Antichrist is here, there will be a mark of the beast that you can't buy or sell without taking it. And I believe in a pre-trib rapture, so I don't think believers that are believers now will be here. But the point is, if you were here and you were a believer and you understand this, and it's obvious because you see the mark of the beast implemented, are you going to follow the directions of the government, or are you going to say no? I'm sure they're going to say this will help the economy, this will help everything else. It might even be, have some sort of a healing property to it. Or, at least they can quickly identify you if you're in an accident. There's going to be all these excuses. And, that would be good. Any kind of a system where you can be quickly identified, pay your taxes, everything that you actually do owe, and get everything back that everything is fair. That would be good. We kind of do the same thing now with credit cards, social security numbers. It's supposed to be fair, but again, people in control can manipulate. At any rate, the Lord says we're not to take the mark of the beast. So this is interesting. I just wanted to point that out, though, that Jason, Hebrew name Yeshua, very interesting. So anyway, so this is what's going on. So he takes the kingdom by flatteries. He has the prince of the covenant assassinated, Onias, and his brother, younger brother, who cares nothing of anything, he's just in line to be priest, wants to take over, and he pays the guy a bunch of money to get in to a position of power. So it's also interesting too. One of the Onias guys, I forget which one it is, but one of them sees this coming and believes the prophecy in Isaiah about a temple to the Lord built in Egypt, about the border, believes that he's called of the Lord to do this. And technically that's against the law of Moses, but apparently it was a thing of the Lord, because he goes down. The Essenes remained pure, went down, and there's actually an Essene temple close by Alexandria, Egypt, and then the Pharisee temple in Jerusalem, which they considered paganized. So it's interesting when you look at the timeline. Jesus died in 32 AD, and the church was born 32 AD. And then about 40 years goes by, and in 70 AD, the temple is destroyed. The Jerusalem temple of the Pharisees is destroyed. 3 years later, destroyed by Titus, that is. 3 years later, Titus goes down because they're very anti-Jewish now because of all the commotion, goes down to Egypt to shut down the Essene temple, one way or the other. But the Essenes, knowing the end of the age is in 2 years, and being ordered by the government that the Lord has placed in power to shut the temple down, That's a fulfillment of prophecy. They just shut down. So they weren't assassinated or anything else. They were just let go because they were peaceful. It's one thing to say, I will not comply with weird orders, and it's another thing to go into battle. So sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. But that's interesting. So 70 AD, destruction of the Jerusalem temple. 73 AD, destruction, or not destruction, but the shutdown of the Essene temple. 75 AD, the actual end of the age. And it was the Council of Yavne that concluded. And one of the conclusions that they made, they picked up and they removed the rabbis, what would be the leadership, to Yavne, out of the area of Jerusalem, and soon to be disbanded anyway. But they made the concept that from now on, since there's no Jerusalem temple, the age of sacrifices is over. And from now on, the only thing we need to do is tzedakah, or good deeds, until the Messiah comes, if he comes. That was kind of the gist of the Council of Yavne. So it's interesting that at that point, the exact change of the age, they decided amongst themselves that the age of sacrifice is over. And 3 or 4 years before, the Gentile powers made it happen. Well, 2 years before, and then actually 5 years before. So lots of interesting thing going on. So this is what happens. And then Antiochus Epiphanes attacks Jerusalem. This is in verse 28. It says, Jason, served his purpose, didn't actually do real well, or someone else could do something better. So Antiochus has Jason deposed. So the false Messiah, the false Yeshua, after betraying his people, destroyed. So it says, then he shall return to his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and turn to his own land. So Jason, thinking Antiochus is now powerless, started a rumor that he had died in hopes of getting his priesthood back. So when Antiochus heard that all of Israel rejoiced in his supposed death, he attacked with fury. This event occurred in 169 BC, and it's recorded in Maccabees 5 through 12. And this is the quote here. So in other words, here's what's going on. Antiochus Epiphanes uses Jason, kills his older brother, puts Jason in power, everything's fine. For whatever reason, he doesn't like Jason, so he deposes him. So then and then leaves the area. So the money's flowing. Jason thinks if the money keeps flowing, and I tell the Jews that I've got rid of him and everything's fine, they'll put me back in power. I'll get to be the priest, so everything will be fine. I'll just tell Antiochus one thing and give him money. I'll tell the Jews something else and manipulate, and everything will be fine. But Antiochus hears back what happened. That in itself may not make him mad, but when he hears the entire nation of Israel is rejoiced that the idiot is dead, that ticks him off. Everybody's rejoicing that I'm dead. I'll show him a thing or two. So he comes back with fury. And so let's, for time, let's skip over this, but it's recorded in 2 Maccabees 5 on that particular one. So the next thing, we get to Daniel 29 and 30. And it says Antiochus basically attacks Egypt. Again, this is 168, so then the following year. Daniel 11, 29 and 30 says, at the time appointed, he shall return, come toward the south, but shall not be as the former or as the latter, because the ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved, and turn and have indignation against the holy covenant. And he will do and even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So according to the scrolls, this is interesting. What happens here is that he takes over Israel in the area, and that's fine. Rome doesn't care. At this point, Israel doesn't have a peace treaty with Rome to ask for them to come in and help or anything like that. So they just think it's part of Antiochus's deal. But Egypt does have a treaty with Rome. And so Antiochus attacks Rome. Roman ships come basically and say, back off or I will annihilate you. I mean, it's like, 100 ships versus your two. There's just no way around it. So he has to back off. So Antiochus does that, and now he's really ticked. And he remembers about how the people in Jerusalem were happy that when they thought he was dead, so he goes back to attack them with full force. So Kittim is the Hebrew word for Rome. And you can see this through because these are all Roman people that do this. Sometimes people will say that, no, that means Cyprus, and the word actually may have originally referred to Cyprus. But at this point, if there are ships that are coming off of the coast of Cyprus into Israel to attack it, and they're all filled with Roman troops, it's kind of a moot point. If it's coming from Kittim or coming from Cyprus, there never has been or will be a Cyprus army that takes over the world, a Cyprus empire. But there was a Roman empire, and it's just the coast of where the ships were at in the Mediterranean. So anyway, so the word for Kittim is Hebrew for Rome. You can see this in Jasher, Josephus, in the Septuagint. Septuagint uses Greek, so it's very clear that it says that it's Roma, rather than Kittim. So what the history is that Roman vessels under the command of Paulius Linnaeus drove Antiochus back. So here's another general that you can look up. You can look up the war between Antiochus of the Seleucid Empire and this particular general. And you can look it up and see what happened, all the specifics about it. So this is what happened. So because of that, he can't mess with Rome and Egypt combined anyway. And so he backs off and goes to Israel. So from, that says 58, this is supposed to be 68. So that is my typo. But from 168 to 165, he takes over Jerusalem, and that's where it's the worst ever. No circumcision, no Torah or anything like that. And we get Hanukkah from the story of the Maccabees. Most of us, I remember when I first learned about the dreidel. You can look this up if you've never heard about it, but a dreidel is a little system for gambling. It's just like a game. You just twirl it. And depending on, it's like one of four chances. And I either get the pot or I put in a dime or whatever it is we're doing. And people have often wondered, why are we gambling? What's the story behind that? Because normally that would be considered sinful. And the whole situation is that Roman troops, not Roman, Seleucid Empire troops are coming through. Antiochus is trying to make sure everybody's not doing Jewish stuff. So you teach your children quietly in the home Torah studies. And what you would do is you'd have a thing on the floor, and you'd have your Torah out and stuff like that. If there's a knock at the door, you immediately take you'd have a special board set over the Torah scrolls. And if it's troops that come in, they see the kids gambling. It's a Greek thing. Yeah, it's got some Hebrew letters, but they're gambling. They're doing Greek stuff. And so they look around, everything looks fine. They leave you alone and go. So it's a way to hide those kind of things. Similarly, it reminds me of a story that Benjamin Franklin had told. Benjamin Franklin, in his autobiography, mentions that he grew up Presbyterian, although he could never wrap his head around the 5 points of Calvinism. But he just loved the Presbyterian church because he grew up in it. But at one point, he was talking about, at one point, it was illegal for you to have your own Bible because you might start doing something the government doesn't want you to do. And so he mentioned, as when he was a kid, and he mentioned that his father had a stool or a chair of some sort with a special compartment in it. And what he would do is when it's time to study, the Bible was in the chair, and he would turn the chair upside down, pull the Bible out, and they'd study. If out of the blue, all of a sudden there's a knock at the door, you close the Bible, slide it in the chair, flip the chair around. Dad sits on the chair. Guys come in. Dad's old, can't get up. He's sick. So you say. So they don't bother Dad. They look all around. There's no Bibles in the house. Everything's fine. So it's this thing. So again, Christians have always been anti-tyranny and pro-Bible. No matter what happens, we will serve our Lord, and we're actually the best um, citizens any country can have. If we're that dedicated to our God to risk our lives, and you're allowing us to worship our God, and our God says under normal circumstances you follow the government, we're going to be loyal to the government. So we're actually the best kind of citizens that there is. So just throwing that in there. But so this is where the Hanukkah and the dreidel and the gambling come in. So a way to appear to be worldly to avoid persecution, and you can quietly continue to study and teach your children. And incidentally, on that, I would have to say that don't expect to take your kids to church, no matter how good the church is, and for them to study scriptures 1 hour a week, and then go to a secular school and spend 30 to 40 hours hearing how stupid Christians are. 40 hours versus 1 hour, you know what's going to happen. Okay, so the point is the church is there to help you, but you have to teach your kids. You have to make sure they understand. When they're older, they'll make their own decisions, but you have to make sure. Don't send them off to a babysitter and expect them to become Einstein, that kind of thing. It's very, very important. And notice that then Benjamin Franklin's dad and the Jews with Hanukkah, you have the trappings, you do whatever you need to do, but you teach your kids Torah and or Bible. So very important. So anyway, so this gets us up to 165 AD when Antiochus dies. So his arms shall stand on his part. They shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. They shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. And this is important because a lot of people will think, this is Antiochus Epiphanes, but Jesus in Matthew 25 is going to quote this verse and say, when you see this in the future, run. Well, if Antiochus now has been dead for 150 years in Jesus' time, and he says, when you see this verse spoken of by Daniel the prophet, when you see that, run, because it's future. That lets us know that we're not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes is a type of those things. So we'll stop there at that point. Well, when we get to Rome, well, I've got a couple of minutes here. Let's see, Iron, Rome with Daniel. I don't know if I have that. Here we go. So here's the timeline, and we'll just do this to stop. But we've went through all the Greeks, and then the ships of Rome come. Okay, Antiochus dies, and we have the Maccabean era. So Antiochus's 3-year occupation. Then the Maccabees drove him out. This is 164 to 64. There's a 100-year time period where the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, are ruling. And that's when everything gets messed up. The Sadducees and Pharisees take control. The Essenes are pushed out. And we have all that stuff that the scrolls talk about, all happening in this time period. So news of the Israelite rebellion crushed the empire. And again, everybody that doesn't like Antiochus, just like the same thing happened with Nimrod, everybody that didn't like him, when little Abraham with 400 and some people took out a quarter of the empire, if he can do that, we can do the rest of it easy. Let's do it. So nobody bothers Abraham or Esau. They just want out of the problem. Same thing with this. When the Maccabees drove the Syrians out, they took their time coming back because they were busy at another war. Well, taking your time coming back is going to make people think you can't do it. And if this small band of Jews can kick you out and make you stay out, and I've got 100 times more army than they are, I can surely take you. And I may or may not be able to do that. But when you've got 10 or 20 nations thinking, I can do this myself, and they all, whether it's coordinated or not, they all attack you, you're done. And this is exactly what happens. So it crushed the empire. He ends up dying a natural death in 164 in the city of Tabe. The Maccabees ruled in peace from 164 to 64 BC. Well, relative peace. There's a lot of history behind it. But then the Roman general Pompey came in and took Jerusalem. And that gets us into the Roman era. And so I'll just say this. This verse here, verse Daniel 11:33, is probably the last verse in this time period. It says, "They that understand among the people will instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, by flame, and captivity, and spoil many days." So this phrase here, it's very important that you get this. There's going to be many days. That's the same phrase in Hosea that talks about Israel being without a king, that 1800-year time period, from 135 to 1948 AD. But they fall by the sword, there's a rebellion, and by flame, the temple is burned, and by captivity. The word captivity in Hebrew can mean I take you and incarcerate you, which is what we think is captivity. You're prisoner in this little place and you can't get out. But it also can mean an expulsion. So you're banished from Jerusalem or you're put in prison so you can't go to Jerusalem. Either way, you can't go to Jerusalem is what we're talking about. And spoil, they were taken spoil. Some of them were in captivity many days. And so this is what we're talking about. And we'll stop there at this point. But the important part is, again, Daniel is prophesying this. He prophesies 4 kings of Persia, Alexander the Great, and then the split of the 4 kingdoms, and then the 2, the north and the south. Then he lists all these people all the way down to the time when the kings, the Maccabean people rule, and Rome steps in. Rome ends up destroying the temple, expulsing the Jews, and they don't come back until AD 1948. So in Daniel 11, in the 30s following, we're still talking about the king of the north, just like in chapter 8, but now we're talking about the Antichrist. Sometime after 1948 AD, the rest of the chapter is fulfilled. And we'll look at that when we get to the time period of the Antichrist. So we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. But again, that's Daniel 11. So we've got Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and Daniel 11, all talking about these empires. And then on a side note, chapter 9 tells us exactly when the Messiah is going to be born. Just like the Dead Sea Scroll 11Q13 tells us the exact, date the Messiah would be born. So, okay, let me stop there. So we'll go ahead and end for tonight, and we'll be back next Monday. So God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.